Subscribe to this podcast to get exclusive access to the after show Shooting the Breeze. So today we have Alex McElroy, I should say, on here, and he is going to be discussing some apologetics. He also pastors a church, so it would be interesting to hear what you have to say about this topic. Why don't you start out by telling us about yourself and giving us a little introduction?
Yeah, thank you for having me. First and foremost, I'm glad to be here. What you're doing is necessary, and especially the reach that you've been able to garner. That's great. So for the kingdom to be able to advance. My name is Alex McElroy. I am based in Chicago. I'm married for 13 years. Yes, got two daughters. I co-pastor a house church here in the city, formerly pastor of education at a larger church, much larger in the city as well. And I also run my own apologetics ministry called Proof for the Truth, where we seek to give answers, or not just give answers, but help people enter into a confirmed, confident, and eternal relationship with the source of all life and purpose.
Yeah, I think that is very important because people can get so much wrong information these days that it's good for them to have a place to go to get the right information. So we'll put a link to that website in the description here. And why don't you tell me a little bit about your testimony and how God has worked throughout your life and what he's currently doing in your life?
Yeah, so it's always tough to know how far back to go, but I don't know how far back to go. Well, I'm originally from the East Coast. I was born in DC, grew up in Maryland and Virginia. My childhood, well, part of my childhood, I lost my father already at age 11, at a young age, and he was diagnosed with sickle cell. I think I was about 5 or 6, and that led to more and more issues, and eventually he succumbed to that. I was able to, I was always doing well in school. So I got through school, went to a great college, University of Virginia. But there, I kind of went off the deep end, the wrong direction, and getting involved in drugs and drinking and everything else that comes with that. I was selling drugs as well, and just very destructive life. So I guess I should back up. I did get saved when I was younger. I knew God. I understand what was happening, but I was never discipled, and I never really grew. And so it was easier for me to fall away. My mom did the best she could. She did great, actually, but there's just no replacement for that true life on life discipleship. So
yeah.
Around that time, well, in college, I met my now wife, but at the time she was an atheist, and how she got saved is a whole nother story. But I'm fast forwarding through a lot. So I managed to make it out of that lifestyle in college. And when I came to Chicago after I got this job here, I had one Christian friend, and we started going to church. So I had stopped going to church because I felt too dirty to go to church. I didn't have anybody there to tell me that that's the one place you need to go, that come as you are. But, it's all, I want to clean myself up first, but of course you can't do that. And so I just kind of stayed away, but I started going back. And then also at the same time, I was trying to be a good son, I guess, and maturing a little bit. And so my mom would always send me books. I never read them. I just threw them in the back of the closet. So one day I was like, well, let me go be a good son and read one of these books. And the first book I picked out of the closet was The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. So I had never heard the word apologetics, didn't know what it was, wasn't looking for evidence. I just wanted to read a book. But I'm a very logical person, just the way I think in general. And so it just kind of appealed to me, this thing that we call apologetics. And so that just kind of started it. I kind of was self-taught for a while. And then I went and got more formal training through Cross-Examine Instructors Academy with Frank Turek, Jim Warner Wallace, Greg Kokel, Sean McDowell, Richard Howe, a bunch of others. Did that for about 3 years, did some training at RZIM, served with them as well. And then I went and got my master's in apologetics a couple years ago.
Oh,
And
cool.
but before that, even before I got my master's, I had already started my own conference. I already did 2 years of my own conference before that. So we just finished year 3 this past weekend. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and sadly, so many people they do feel that they are too dirty to come to church or whatever, that they can do that on their own, and realizing that you can't do that on your own is huge, and people need to hear that. So I think that's an important part of your testimony there.
Amen.
So with apologetics, it's a big subject, big topic, lots that could be discussed, but if you could just give us a basic rundown on what apologetics is for those who are out there and don't know.
So the simple definition that I give is apologetics is the branch of theology concerned with the accurate defense of the faith, often through scientific, historical, archaeological, or philosophical evidence.
And there's definitely lots of historical evidence out there, more than what most people realize.
Yes.
And as Christians, I think that's very important to our faith, that we need to realize that. And I like to watch documentaries. My son's very smart, so he loves to watch these things too. And then he can prove all the other science shows wrong, and he does. He does it very well, actually. So how can a Christian apply apologetics to their own life and use it to strengthen their faith?
Okay, so a lot of ways. Well, let me before I even get into that, I think we need to kind of bust a myth that I don't know how it's even here. So it's almost become like a tagline of mine now, that apologetics is not optional. There's I guess a belief, either intentional or unconscious or subconscious, I don't know, but that like people like me, the apologists, do apologetics, right? And it's not really a Christian layperson type of thing to involve yourself in, but that's not true. And so the way we get apologetics, the way we get this understanding, or this word even, is in part from 1 Peter 3:15, which says, it says, always be prepared to give a defense for the hope that is in you, but with meekness and with a good conscience, that when they defame you as evildoers, they will be made to feel ashamed. But the word to give a defense in the original Greek is the word apologia. So for all those who think like I made the word up or it's some new thing it's not. It's in your Bible.
Yeah, I like to go back to the original Greek when I hear that, because I think that and like Hebraic, like it's so different from what a lot of the translations are today, and it can be confusing.
Yes.
So I definitely think that's important for us to learn to go to that for sources of information instead of just our own translations. Like even NIV is sometimes off on their translations.
Yes.
And Jonathan Cahn, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he used to be a rabbi, and now he's a big into ministry for Christianity, and especially to the Judaist people out there. And so he always ties everything back to the original Hebrew and points out the words in there. And I love reading his stuff because it's fascinating to learn, and I think it strengthens us.
It does. So this is what's called an Interlinear Bible. Now you can go to like blueletterbible.org and you can scroll through their online version of it. And this is kind of hard to get, actually. I got mine from a friend, but if you look in there, it has
Hebrew,
all the English next to the Hebrew. It gives you all the definitions, and obviously Greek in the New Testament, so you can see the original words. And I want to be clear, and so you brought up NIV, and there are some problems in NIV, and there's this is part of apologetics, is understanding how the canon was formed, how translations are formed, what is a formally equivalent, dynamically equivalent translation. But what everyone needs to understand is that a translation is never made from a translation. A translation is always made from here.
Yeah.
Whatever translation it is. Now, some get closer to this than others, but just so people understand how scholarship works, that it's not just, however I think to interpret the words. I'm sitting here interpreting it by myself, and this is my translation. That's not how it goes. So yeah, just in case anybody was wondering. But some translations intentionally seek to be what's called dynamically equivalent, which means they want to make it understandable for people who are English readers, and they want to be as close to the original as possible, but they're leaning more towards understandability. And sometimes, as you just said, you lose a little bit of the original in that.
Yeah.
While we're talking about it, I have to remind people, it's cool to quote chapters and verses, which we all do. I do. But that's a relatively recent benefit or ability that we have. There were no chapters until the 13th century. There were no verses till the 15th century or 16th. So most of the history of the church, they couldn't read chapter and verse. They couldn't quote chapter and verse. They couldn't say in Ephesians 3, chapter whatever, or chapter verse whatever, which means they had to read all of Matthew and then talk about it or write a commentary about it, or math or Romans or whatever. So the fact that we have over 1 million quotations from the early church fathers lets us know, number one, it was understandable that they were quoting from Matthew, even without chapter and verse, because everyone else had read the entirety as well. Mm-hmm. So part of the thing that I think is hurting the church to a degree is, it's like a blessing and a curse, right? It's great that we can just go to a verse, go to a chapter and get it quickly. That's a good thing usually, but it also can make us lazy, because then we feel, oh, I got the gist. I don't have to read the whole letter of Romans or the whole letter of Galatians. But that's not the way the Bible works. It's just like if I write you a letter and then you only read the middle sentence and say, I got the gist, Alex. Like that's not going to work for me. I wrote 5 pages. You need to understand what I was trying to say. So essentially reading the Bible is reading someone else's mail, and we need to be faithful in how we do that. So I guess the first answer to your question of how lay people do this is just being faithful to the text. Don't assume it means what it means. Don't read into the text, which is called eisegesis. We want to be proper and faithful to the text and say, whatever it says is what I want to know. I don't want to bring my meaning to the text. I want to get it out of the text, which is exegesis.
Yeah. And so many people make that mistake. They take one verse and they take it out of context. Like I had somebody on my YouTube channel who was trolling the other day, and he was misquoting, like just taking one verse. And then he's like, well, and then I was kind of debated with him a little bit until I got to the point where I'm just like, you don't actually want information.
Right.
So there's no point. You're wasting my time. Yep. But all he was doing was taking verses out of context constantly. And I'm like, that doesn't fly with me. I kept telling him, I said, well, you're missing the context of this whole thing. I said, if you read these verses before it and these verses after it, it actually means this. And so I was like, but he didn't want to hear any of that. I'm just like, okay, well, then you're wasting my time. There's exactly. No point if you're just here to troll and be that way. But I mean, so many people do that, and some of them do that unintentionally, and they don't think about the fact that they're doing that, and that kind of leads them astray. And that's where I think apologetics kind of helps guide them back onto the right path.
Absolutely. And pastors do it. I mean, every Sunday, just scroll your timeline on Facebook or Instagram. You'll see some pastor that is, it's a clip from, I know it's a clip from his sermon, but especially like a lot of the big time famous ones, just watch a clip. And then if you just take it and go back to the text and you're like, wait, but that's not what that means. Right. And and especially in Western Christianity, where the appeal to the emotional in some spaces is so high, people get excited about what the pastor's saying. But if it's not true, you're going to go from excitement to anger within some months, because you're expecting this kind of prophecy or blessing to come, but it was never going to come because it was never in the text to begin with. And so like, that's the part that makes me kind of feel sorry, because we already have enough to contend with. We, the church, especially me, a former youth pastor, what kind of keeps me going is toward my ministry is really directed towards youth and young adults, because we see the statistics of 65% of our young people walking away from the faith when they get to or through college. Yeah. Well, the reason is not because Christianity can't stand up, is they don't know it can. And if we don't prepare them before they leave, then they come back thinking we hid something from them, or we didn't tell them the whole truth, or the professor knows more than you or your mom or your youth pastor or whatever. It's not true. The professor's only giving you half the story. They just don't tell you that. And so
half the time in
right.
universities, they are not at all Christian. They're wanting to steer you away from it. And
they'll
that's,
tell you that.
yeah, exactly.
They'll tell you up front, like, if you're a Christian on day one, you won't be by the time you leave my class.
Yeah.
So what do our kids do? Yeah.
Yeah. And I call that the overeducation problem. Where I think we put too much emphasis on education, and it ends up leading them astray, because they don't have that biblical foundation, like you say, before they go. They don't have that biblical foundation.
Yeah. Now, so I think that's true, but we need to. I've been advocating, I don't know how to make this happen, but I'll just keep talking about it until someone does it. We need in high school, probably maybe before that, but it definitely at some point in high school, we need to teach young people how to think. So there should be a philosophy 101 class that there's mandatory. Be. The reason is telling information is good to our young people, and teaching them, like, this is how you read, this is how you do math. They need that. What I'm saying is how to think. There's 3 laws of logic. So my apologetics ministry is like leans heavily on philosophy. And while we're talking about it, everyone is a philosopher. Everyone. Alvin Plantinga, I think, said some people are just better at it than others. So philosophy is not something anyone can say, I don't want to do that. If you think hard about anything, you're doing philosophy. So anyway, the 3 laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, says 2 opposing truths cannot both be true in the same time and space. The law of the excluded middle, which says not just 2 opposing truths can't both be true, but one of them must be true. There is no middle option. The law of identity, that a thing is what it is, which sounds redundant, but it's a necessary law to prevent the fallacy of equivocation. So I don't want to go into all the details of that, but I'm just saying that knowing how to think is, okay, you present an idea and then I present an idea, and the kid is listening and saying, well, based on the law of non-contradiction, they can't both be right, or one of them must be right. Just getting them to think that far, because then they can go into the world and adjudicate between competing ideas. And they won't say the ridiculous things that the culture is now saying, which is we all have our own truth.
Yeah.
That's not possible. Not because I don't want it to be possible. It's illogically and it's logically impossible. So it sounds good. It sounds feel good. And, everybody wins, but it's not. It's just not. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the gender identity issues come in too, is, well, there's science, and then there's what people want to believe. And they're contradicting right now. I got banned off Twitter for a year for simply pointing that out, but
oh wow,
I finally got unbanned after my MPs helped me, like my members of parliament from our federal government. I have friends who are MPs, and they got me unbanned.
Wow. Where are you located?
In Saskatchewan. But okay. One of the ladies running for our leadership of the party I support, her and we had a really, really good conversation when she was here, and about censorship especially. And I'm like, yeah, it's a big deal. Like it's hit my channel on a few occasions, but and that's where that critical thinking, in terms of like actually looking at it logically, instead of just being like, oh, I believe this, so you can believe that. Like, it's no, like there is only one truth, like you say.
Yeah.
So for society as a whole, how can we overcome this kind of thinking? I know you presented philosophy teaching in school as well. Is there other ways to approach it in society?
Yes, just not on social media. So it's going to be kind of case by case, and I know that kind of sounds like a cop out, but it's not. It's that everyone's an individual, and we need to answer questions of people, remembering that we're answering a person, not just a question. So depending on like the one who was antagonistic on your comments, I'm the same way as you. I'll rebut twice. That's all you get, and then we're done. So,
Yeah.
I can't go all day with these people. So, and be honest with you, most are disingenuous. The commenters online.
Oh yeah.
But at my conference this past weekend, one of the first people to buy a ticket was an atheist, and I've actually struck up a friendship with her, and she's even come to our church on Easter Sunday and Good Friday, and the church knows she's an atheist, and like this is probably easier to do in a house church. Um, I I probably more than most, just because of the nature of what I do, have more of these conversations with people with different worldviews on a regular basis. But treating people as people and just starting from points of agreement, I think is the best place. So there's things in life that we're all struggling with. We're all dealing with. We all are in this pandemic together, or coming out of it, or whatever. And so there's look for commonality, common ground, for points you can enter in on, and especially with issues of morality, or anything surrounding that. Because one huge problem. So most of my issues are with, I guess, atheists or naturalists. And one huge problem, maybe the huge problem with naturalism, is it can't ground anything. Most notably morality. And what I mean, for those listening, is if you can't root or ground where a moral law or standard comes from, then it's just nebulous. It's just floating in midair. Which, okay, fine. If that's the way it is, that's the way it is. But if it is that way, then we ultimately can't hold anybody accountable for violating a law that's not objective. So when we look at the world and we see that there's evil, and even atheists will say, well, the fact that there is evil proves there's no God. Okay, well, no, it doesn't. It actually proves there is. Mm-hmm. Because in order for you to recognize evil, or if evil is an objective, or what we call ontological reality, ontology, I know I'm throwing big words at everybody. So ontology is what actually is. It's a like, this is ontologically a pen. Then we have epistemology, which is how I know what I know. It's a study of how I know what I know. How did I come to know this was a pen? You told me, I read it in a book. There's lots of ways to come to knowledge. But what I'm saying is, if a moral law is an ontological reality, that means it's actual, it's legitimate, it's valid. It cannot originate from those who it governs, us. Because if it does, it's always going to be victim to our mental fluctuations, our moral fluctuations. So it's never going to be objective. So once again, if that's how it is, that's how it is. But the question is that livable? And would you want to live in a world like that, right? Where some people think murder is wrong, some people don't. Do you want to live in that world? And so if evil actually exists, it is not itself an ontological reality. It is a degradation of a reality, which is goodness, or what we call the good. Well, I would say it's like evil is good gone bad. Augustine said it is a privation. It is like, you have light. You can have a light with no shadow, but you can never have a shadow with no light, right? Milk, you buy the milk, it's good, but eventually it spoils, but it's still milk. It's just bad milk. So there's a bunch of examples to show the degradation of the perfection, which is goodness, is where evil is what evil is. The way you differentiate between good and evil is by using the moral law. But once again, if that moral law comes from us, it's going to shift. Our own, human laws that we write and create shift, right? So how could this moral law remain objective? Well, you need a transcendent source. Now, up to this point, I haven't mentioned God. I'm just saying the evidence points to, okay, if I'm a detective, this is what I'm looking for. This is the potential person of interest that I'm looking for, is someone who's transcendent, that could remain objective, that could provide a moral law. And why someone? Because moral laws always pertain, or always in regards to people. the law of gravity can't be the thing that produces a moral law. So every other naturalistic way forward fails here, because you can't start with energy and with gravity and somehow get to morality, not objectively at least. The best we can do without God in the paradigm is, me and you, Tony, would say, hey, let's agree to not kill each other. Cool. It's just like a handshake agreement.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even John Locke, who propagated that himself, said, do not take God out of the situation, though. He was just saying this is a good thing for practicality, but don't get God out of society, because then it won't matter about the handshake. And he's right. That's why Friedrich Nietzsche last century said in his Diary of a Madman, said, when we've killed God, basically the diary, where is there's no more up or down. Where is God? We can't even find our way forward. And he's saying this as one who's advocating for the death of God, but he's also saying there are implications to this. And he predicted that it would be the bloodiest century once we got to that no God mentality. And he was right. The 20th century was bloodier than the first 19 put together. So,
yeah, this one,
the implications. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to where we're seeing the big divide in society now. I think a lot of that comes down to that exact thing, is people aren't really going to where there's true evidence. And same with how evolution is built. It's not facts. It's all theory based upon theory based upon theory. And that's not the way that we need to be building knowledge.
So it's funny you say that. So my ministry is called Proof of the Truth. And I was actually preaching at a church, not yesterday, the week before. And the topic they gave me was, what is truth? And so the first half of that sermon was like a philosophy lesson. And the second half, I brought it to the scriptures. But I start with truth, because if truth is not knowable or cannot be objective, then we don't need to be talking about anything else. Like, I don't need to do what I do. You don't need to do what you're doing. We can just go home. So the starting point is there such a thing as truth? And if there is, how do we know it? How do we determine? There are ways. So there's this, I don't know how we got here, but the world now, I've even had people tell me, I even had one person tell me this weekend, like, there's no way to know truth. And people have their own truth and this and that. How do we know who's right? Like, I get the confusion, because there's just like death by a million cuts. That's kind of how it is in life with all the religions and worldviews and these things. But there is a way to objectively parse through these things. And this is not new. It's not like I created this. There's the two tests of the correspondence theory of truth, coherence theory of truth. Do these statements or propositions, when they're put together, do they correspond to reality? Do they form a coherent worldview? Are these things logically consistent? Is there empirical evidence? Is it experientially relevant? Like, these are all things that are in place that, once again, is the reason we need to teach this in high school, because those 5 things I said, every human on the planet needs to know that. I don't care what you do in life. You need to understand how to properly adjudicate between competing thoughts and ideas, because ideas have real world consequences. Like, I honestly, I don't know if I'd be I would still be evangelizing and preaching the gospel, but I don't know if I'd be as passionate about this, especially in the philosophical lane, as I am, if the implications weren't so dire. There was a quote, I think, by Joel Spreckman. He said, remember, I'm paraphrasing and I'm gonna get it wrong, but he said basically what the Nazis did, it didn't start or occur in the camps of Auschwitz and these places, or even on the battlefields. He said this started in the lecture halls of these universities, where ideas were allowed to be brought up and fester and grow. And then those ideas were brought to fruition. But that's why I say ideas matter, thoughts matter. Bad thinking has real world consequences. So how we think does matter. It's not just because the idea is you have your truth. And so as long as you're just doing you and not hurting anybody, but nothing stays in a corner for very long, right? It always spills out. There's always some overflow. There's always some collateral damage. And with really bad ideas, there's a lot of collateral damage. So we need to, in the church, I might have missed the original question, but I'll come back to it.
That is okay.
But the original, or this thought carries into the church, because I think, and J.P. Moreland writes about this probably in the middle of the century, last century, this wave of anti-intellectualism was kind of sweeping through the church, kind of in tandem with the rise in the charismatic movement and Pentecostalism. But it's hurt us, and we're reaping the babies of that time right now, where for the fact that I even have to explain apologetics to a pastor, like what it is or why they need it, like I shouldn't have to do that. You know what I'm saying? There's a large, huge tradition. Literally, all of the early church fathers were apologists. That's all they were. In fact, that usually, like Justin Martyr, the title of his work is Apology, Tertullian Apology. Like this is, I don't know how we missed this. And so if we don't stop neglecting or disavowing the intellectual in our churches, we're giving over that ground to the enemy. We're basically telling people, come to church for your spiritual stuff, but get your intellectual stuff out there. And they will. When we understand that Jesus said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, I ask people, so how do you love God with your mind? I would say you use it. Yeah. That's one way. I mean, it's baffling to me. Like, why wouldn't you want to know more? That's just going to embolden you and increase your faith. Why wouldn't you want to learn more about God and what he did? And the awesome thing is Christianity presents, out of all other religions, a testable faith, which lends itself to finding evidence. I have archaeologists friends, and like the finds that they have it's incredible.
And more and
like,
more.
That's really cool.
Like,
right?
Yeah. Like they disproved Gideon to be true by archaeological evidence that they just found. And I'm like,
there's another one
that for a long time.
Yeah. There's another one they just found. I was watching on Sean McDowell's channel that proves the biblical dating or early dating of the Exodus. Like that's pretty, because skeptics can no longer say, well, that was wrong or the Bible's wrong. Every time they do, it gets away for a few years and then they find something in the ground. It's like, oh wait, the Bible was right all along. So
yeah, something else lined up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one thing that if you even quote like Christian sources, and that's one thing that people are just like, oh, well, that's not a legitimate source. And it's like, well, what do you mean? There's archaeological evidence that backs up this.
Right.
But they're sayings. How can you say that that's not true when you believe evolution? And that's based on like a little skull piece of Lucy that isn't even like that. If you actually line it up, it's actually an ape. Like,
yeah.
So I just I think it's funny. I loved the program Debunk TV, because they went and they debunked a whole bunch of these things, and I'm like, yeah, they're showing us evidence, like you say, all the evidence, and lining all that up and teaching people to think critically and logically in terms of like, oh, is this actually true, or like, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
And what is going to be the easiest way for someone to actually start just understanding it and actually start getting people to start thinking that way?
It's a good question. There's a couple books I usually recommend from some of my former trainers. I actually recommend their books more than my own. I wrote a book, but it's like that's where you go. So the first one by Frank Turek, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It's actually by Frank Turek and Norm Geisler. The second one I recommend a lot is Jim Warner Wallace's book, Cold Case Christianity. And these are kind of catch-alls where you're going to get a lot of evidence in one location. Just begin to read, familiarize yourself with some of the evidence, the arguments. And I know that the way the world is different now, especially the younger generation. you're watching probably a video right now of me and Tony. So I have a YouTube channel as well. It's called Relentless Pursuit of Purpose. I try to do a video every Thursday, either an interview or a video I create. But I bring experts on that I know. And like I had Dr. Hugh Ross, astrophysicist, on last week. We cover everything, you know, not him and I, but I cover every type of thing on my channel. So that's a good place to start, just to kind of familiarize yourself with, hey, I wonder what about the canon, and there's a video on the canon, or I wonder about the problem of evil. So just those types of things. But I think a lot of times, because you made a good point, is that a lot of Christians don't actually know what the issues people have with Christianity are until they get posed with those questions, and then they're kind of sideswiped or caught off guard. Like, wait, what? I thought everybody thought what I thought. But you need to know that some people don't believe Jesus is God. They think he's just a good prophet. Some people think the miracles are all analogies. They don't think Jesus rose from the grave, bodily, spiritually. They don't. You need to know some basic beliefs of Islam. You need to know some basic facts about naturalism. Like you need to kind of have a mental library where you have a couple things to draw from, and then as you engage in conversations with people, learn from them, and don't even look to push back necessarily. This listen sometimes, and especially if you don't know the answer, just listen and take it in, and then go back home and do some research and come back and give answers when you see them again. Those are some things I'd recommend. But let me also free everybody up. You're not going to be the cause of someone not knowing God because you didn't say the right answer. Okay, so the Holy Spirit, more powerful than us, more powerful than myself, he wants them to be saved more than you. Therefore, we're simply being used by him. We're simply a mouthpiece. We're the hands and the feet, and we do our best imperfectly. And understanding that, like Paul said, we plant, we water, but God gives the increase. So take the pressure off. Don't feel like you have to be William Lane Craig to be able to talk to somebody. You know, no one else is going to be him. Just like there's not even there's no point in trying. He is him. He's the only one. But we all do need to speak up to those who are in our circle. There's people that Dr. Craig will never come in contact with, that I won't come in contact with, but you will. And you may be the only Bible people read. So just take your time, prepare yourself as much as possible. You'll never be fully prepared, and just be available to God to be used in whatever situation.
Yeah, and I think prayer is a huge part of that. Yes. Yeah, because it comes down to, I always pray before podcasts. Your words, not mine. Like, just speak through us. And that's why I like the conversational thing, because it doesn't always go the direction I necessarily was heading for, but I trust that that's where God wanted the conversation to go. And so I think that is just important for us in our everyday, is just pray, God, use me the way you want me to be used. And I always tout out Alvin Vandergreed's book, Love to Pray, because it teaches you how to pray and how to pray effectively. And because a lot of people just pray and they don't really take it seriously, or they don't believe it's going to come true. And it's like, well, no, there's faith that comes with prayer, and having knowledge to back up that gives you a stronger faith, which helps you pray more effectively. And I think that is very important. I think that ties into everything that you've been talking about is prayer and Bible reading, and that I think is just so huge. And if you could give just a piece of advice for the church in today's society, reaching people, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I to a group of pastors and leaders on fixing your evangelism. Listen, the last 2 years have hurt us all, some more than others, but it's really hurt the church in the West. Not actually hurt. Let me rephrase it. It hasn't actually. It's hurt the way we do church in the West.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm hoping and praying that pastors especially took this time to re-examine their ecclesiology, but I know they didn't. So most of them. And that's the reason I say that, because if the whole pandemic, you were just looking forward to like, can we just get back? Can we get back to the building? Can we get back? Can we get back? I get it. We want a fellowship. But there was a time there, I believe it was almost an opportunity God gave us to say, okay, what are some things I've been not doing? Or what are some things I could tweak? Or what are some things that we're missing that would help do what you just said and get people back engaged, especially young people? I was talking with I don't remember, somebody at my conference, I think, but we all can see that youth ministries are in decline. We have to be honest with why. When I can teach in a youth group, there was a day and age where this didn't exist. Now it does, which means when I'm teaching, huh?
We were better off in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I know. But if I ask my mom something growing up, like, what about God, this and that, or whatever question, and she tells me an answer, all right, well, I guess that's the answer. Like, what am I going to do? There's nowhere to go challenge or check. And I'm not saying we shouldn't challenge or check you. I'm just saying the internet itself is not truth. So just because a kid Googles something and finds what they want, it doesn't make it truth, which is why they need to know how to think, right? So that's one part of the problem. We have a lot more to contend with. Our young people have a lot more to fight against. Like me and you growing up was, we had some stuff to contend with, but the way the culture's gone, the over-sexualization of everything and everyone, and them having to deal with that at such a younger age, it's like, man, I'm having conversations with my 10-year-old, my 7-year-old that I don't want to have, but I have to because I can't let them have it, the culture. Yeah. And I'm like, but this is not age appropriate for 7. But if I don't do it, the culture is going to do it. You see, I'm like, this is not. So we have to wake up and just say, look, the world that we're in now is not the world we, as the parents who are parents right now, grew up in. And we have to be a little more aggressive in our approach. So I started teaching my daughter apologetics at age 8. Not the cosmological argument or stuff like that, but just stuff on her level. She ended up making a faith.
We do the same kind of thing with our kids.
Same thing, right? Train up. It's not like that's a very intentional thing. The Shema that they would recite twice a day in ancient Israel in Deuteronomy 6. Wherever you go, when you sit, when you walk, when you lay down, teach these things to your kids. That's what they recited. Basically, wherever you are, whenever you are, you should be showing and teaching your kids something about God. Now, that doesn't mean a Bible study. It could just be how you respond to somebody. They're seeing, they're watching. Some lessons are caught, not taught. So when my wife and I are doing Bible study, I don't make my kids come. They see it. They're growing up seeing this is normal. When they see me and their mother, my wife, pray, they just see it. They see, oh, that's what they do, right? And then sometimes they're like, I want to pray too. Okay, come on. But I'm not forcing anything. They just want to see, they want to be a part of what mommy and daddy do. Yeah. And on top of that, I do teach. So it's not just that. I am saying this is why we pray. This is who we're praying to. We read the Bible. So it's all those things together. But of course we have fun too. So it's not just, hey, sit down, learn the Bible, and but it has to be incorporated. And there's teachable moments. Something happens and someone does something, someone says something, you're like, well, God says this about that. And this is how we should, those moments that just randomly happen, use those. So I think we have a lot more opportunities and a lot more ways to be good at this, to be better at this as parents and as leaders, if we're paying attention. And as you're doing that, also continue to educate yourself. Don't stop doing that, because my 8-year-old, 7-year-old even, they'll ask some questions. I remember I was doing bath time. This is way long ago. So bath time, she must have been, or there's both of them there. I don't know, but under 5. Somehow we start talking about the Trinity. I'm like, how are you even asking this question? But she wasn't saying Trinity. She was just talking about like, how is God the Father and the Son? But they're thinking. That's my point.
Yeah.
There's another resource. A friend of mine who I train with, her name is Natasha Crane. She has a book called, what is her book? 40 Conversations You Should Have with Your Kid or something. 40 God Conversations. Anyway, it basically is a guide on how to have apologetic conversations with your kids if you're a parent, if you're not an apologist. Like, it's a roadmap. So there's resources out there, y'all. Go to coldcasechristianityforkids.com. Jim Warner Wallace, he has 10 videos, all free. You don't have to buy the book. You can watch those videos with your young person, talk through them. They're not even really about the Bible. They're just about literally how to think, how to examine evidence. So there's all these things. And in my own book is a Blueprint for Bible Basics, which I directed more towards teens. Mm-hmm. Teaches them the foundational concepts of the faith. We're not getting into like baptism and tongues and all that. Just who is Jesus? What is worship? What's the Bible? How do I, like, the basics? It has a study guide included. It's only $10. So I'm just saying, like, there's all this stuff out there. And as a parent, you gotta be more intentional about taking advantage of it, because I can tell you, you don't want to go through. I've talked to senior pastors. Almost every place I speak, when I get done a Q&A, there's some mom, some person comes up to me. My son came home last week from college, told me he doesn't want to be a Christian anymore. Raised in the church all his life, faithful parents, no scandals. And now he's not a Christian. Not because it's not true, just because he got talked out of it, because, as Frank Turk said, he's never been talked into it.
Yeah.
So we, the church, we, the adults, just got to be honest and say, maybe we missed some stuff. Maybe we dropped the ball some places. Maybe not us personally, but we as a collective. And once we're honest, we can say, okay, let's fix it then. And in part, my ministry exists to come alongside churches to do that. We provide apologetics workshops that churches can host, because we know it's just not a real possibility that churches have apologists on staff. That's just not a thing. Yeah. So we know that, and I can't go everywhere, but we'll go wherever we can. I mean, as many places as we can all over the country, where we come in, we deliver the content, we'll do the Q&A, and just be a resource to you. So if you're a pastor and you're like, man, we need this, but I'm not qualified to do this, reach out. Proofforthetruth.org.
Yeah, and that's where I think that I'm a firm believer that people should try to encourage their kids to go to at least 1 year of Bible school to try to get that, at least that foundation. I only have 1 year myself because I got married and then we had to take a year off. So I took my other studies instead of finishing up with Bible school. But I'm a firm believer in at least a year, because I think it just gives you that strong foundation and that knowledge. And if you're going to off to university, you want to have that knowledge. You want your kids to have that knowledge, like you're talking about, before they go and try and get talked out of it by some professor who thinks that he has a right to disavow your religion.
Absolutely.
So thanks for coming on. Is there any final thoughts that you have before we sign off here?
Not final thoughts. I mean, like I said, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you having me on. I think it's a great thing. We need more of this. So thank you. I just want to encourage everyone listening. Listen, this is the way God's called me specifically to help the body, and I'll do as much as I can. But I just want everyone to really take this away, that this is not an optional thing that we as the body of Christ get to kind of bow out of or bow into. Apologetics must be a part of what we do when we teach. So wherever I can help, I will. But if I can't, just, if you want to learn on your own, that's encouraged as well.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to check out the prooffortruth.org. It's a good website. And as well, I'll put a link to your Alex R. McElroy .com. I'll put a link to that as well, so people can check out that and see who you are.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I have just been blessed with so many people who are requesting to be on the show, and I'm impressed with how many people want to share their testimonies or what they're doing for the Lord right now. If I haven't got back to you, I promise I will get back to you. I look forward to speaking with each of you and interviewing you, and keep tuning into the show. There's lots of new people that are coming on here, and if you're considering wanting to come on the show, just shoot me an email at tpeters745 at gmail.com, and I will get back to you.